Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 23, verses 13 through 39. And the text says, Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, teachers of the law, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come the righteous blood, all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth. From the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly, I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you, those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you are not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. All right, remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number one, what did we talk about last week in 23, 1 through 12? A, spiritual authority. The Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, do everything they tell you. So we did talk about that. We didn't talk about that long or much. Because that wasn't the main point. But I think remembering that he does say, do everything they tell you, sort of tempers the legalism on what he says later. So if we take everything without this, we might be tempted to miss the heart of what he's saying and go into legalism the other direction. B, hypocrisy. but don't do what they do, for they don't practice what they preach. So he definitely said this, and that was the continuation of that, and really the more important point of it. See, their rules are for others and not them, and they don't help others bear them. So they tie up heavy burdens on people, but they don't lift a finger to. So they're not helpers. They're not leaders of the people. They're not people bringing people close to God. They're people keeping people from God. D, they do things for people to see. Their phylacteries are long. All of this is so that they look really holy. E, you don't be like this. And we talked about titles because Jesus said don't call people teacher or father or instructor. But we talked about how that was not as much a legalistic rule as an idea about how we should and shouldn't relate to each other and where God is in it. So it constantly says God's your teacher, God's the Father, God's the Messiah is your instructor. So in other words, if you're putting yourself in the place of them, then that's wrong. If your authority comes from God, then I don't think the point was don't call anybody teacher as much as it was don't revere people in the place of God. And the people that are teaching should, because their authority comes from God and not from themselves, then there's a humility that comes with that they are under their own teaching, because their teaching isn't from them as the authority for others. It's from God for us. And really, I think that's what the point of that was. And the fact that he recognizes the authority of Moses' seat, he does not tell them not to listen to them, because he says they're in a position of spiritual authority. So do what they say, but they're not doing it right. And so you shouldn't follow in their footsteps that way. Number 2, what does Jesus say next? According to 23:13, whoa! It is not that. Although you may, if you're reading along and you get to this, you may feel like that. Whoa! Because Jesus gets very assertive and direct in a way that we don't normally think of him being. I think he was, but we don't think of him that way very often. And so it can take us aback when we get there. B, woe. This is the woe that we're talking about. Woe is not a word that we use very often. In fact, I think probably in this year, maybe in this decade, the only time you will ever use the word woe is when you read this text and we study this scripture and we're talking about it. So it's not something that we usually say. So in some ways, that means we might not understand fully what it says. In other ways, we might say, well, we know this is all bad stuff, so it kind of brings the meaning to it, because this is the one place where we think of that word. So C is my attempt to bring some context to it or some definition to it. Saying woe is like saying you're in trouble if, or you're going down the wrong path if. You're causing great grief if. Who's the grief caused to? To God? To the people around you? Maybe even to yourself. You're causing great grief. You're getting yourself into trouble. It's going to be a problem. Or shame on you if, which is something I heard a lot growing up. Maybe something, I don't know if that's falling out of favor in today's world, but it seems like the most, the one we would, the thing that we might understand more, that is used more often than this word woe, but conveys a similar meaning. You're on the wrong path. You're bringing grief. And in fact, you're bringing shame upon yourself if this is how you're going to act. So, number 3, what are these things Jesus corrects? So now we're going to try to take all of this text, and so Jesus is quick hitting the things that they're doing wrong. So what are those things? Verse 13, you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who are trying to. Now, I'm just going to say there's overlap in these. They sort of build on each other. They don't seem random. They seem piled up in a very particular way. So these are the religious leaders who should be paving the way for people to come in contact with God. Think of John the Baptist's call, make straight paths for God. Prepare the way of the Lord. But they're not doing that. Instead, they're causing it to be hard for people to come. They're saying, you don't belong here. You shouldn't come here because of the things you're doing or you've done. B, verse 15. Woe to you, teachers of the law, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. That's rough. So what's interesting is, in the church today, sometimes we're like, we're not about mission. There's not very many people that are actually bringing people to God, winning converts. But what this says is the Pharisees didn't have that problem. The teachers of the law, they were winning converts. The problem is they were making their converts just like them. And they were not who God wanted them to be. They were not behaving as God had intended for his people to behave. So their converts were worse off than they were. C, verses 16 through 22. Woe to you, blind guide, if anyone swears by the temple. So this is a long sort of, I don't know what they were doing or what their reasoning was, but apparently they said, well, the temple's holy. You don't have any control over that. You don't have any, so you can't swear by the temple. That's not yours to swear by. It's almost like when you take an oath, you're taking an oath, and what is the consequence of your not following through? So, if you're swearing by the temple, that's not yours to give up. So what do you mean? So you swear by the gold of the temple. That's what they were telling them. Don't swear by the altar. Swear by the sacrifice on the altar. But he says, the temple is what makes the gold sacred. The altar is what makes the offering important, makes it matter. So you're splitting hairs here. You're confused. There's another place where Jesus says, don't swear, because who can make even one, don't swear by your own head. You can't even make a hair grow, so they're just really confused about what it's okay to swear by. And basically, in that place, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. In other words, do what you say. Why do you even need an oath? But he's saying, whatever you swear by, it's the same. Just that in a lot of ways, what he's saying is let your yes be yes and your no be no. It doesn't matter what you swear by. All of it is connected. And they're splitting hairs, I said, but in verse 24, which is indeed 23 and 24, and I said these build on each other. He says, you blind guides, you strain out a gnat to swallow a camel. So they're separating things that shouldn't be separated. That you think this matters, but actually there's this bigger thing that you didn't even pay attention to. He says, you give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So he doesn't say, don't worry about tithe, just be faithful. Don't worry about tithe, just practice justice and mercy. He doesn't say that. See, tithe is an act of worship, recognition of who gave me what I've received, my provider, and it's an act of faith, an act of trust that he will be able to stretch what I have to cover everything that's needed. And so tithe is important, but it's not important because once I've tithed, I'm righteous. It's important because it's a symbol of something that's in here. Can you tithe and not have trust in God? Can you tithe and not recognize God as your provider? Yeah, people do that. And that's probably what the Pharisees were doing, because he's saying, pay attention to the more important things that are actually the attitude of the heart on the inside. And then I said it builds on each other. So then he says, you clean the outside. This is 25 and 26. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgent. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. In other words, you're paying attention to appearances. You're cleaning the outside, but the inside's still dirty. Clean the inside. That's what God cares about, and it will have an impact on the outside. So this is holiness teaching. If you've been around the Church of the Nazarene for very long, we do believe cleaning the inside cut of the cup makes the outside clean. Some people misinterpret holiness teaching to mean we clean the outside of the cup, but we leave the inside dirty. That's not what holiness is. Holiness is a choice to focus on devoting everything that's in me to God, and we believe that changes what comes out of me. So F, verses 27 and 28, in the same way, so it says, you are like whitewashed tombs. In other words, a tomb that's been painted on the outside. You look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside you're full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. So you're caring too much about what's on the outside, but that it's kind of like you can't put lipstick on a pig. I don't care how much you paint that tomb, it's still a tomb and there's bones inside. Verses 29 through 32. You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. So they said, we wouldn't have done what our parents did. They killed the prophets. We wouldn't have done that. We're better than them. And he basically says, no, first of all, you've just testified against yourself because you're the children of the ones that killed the prophets. Second of all, I know your hearts, and you would have. And then third of all, I could have included verses 33 through 36 in this, but what does Jesus say next according to verses 33 through 36? He says, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers, but you will chase them down and kill them. In other words, the proof that what's in your heart is the same as what was in the heart of your ancestors, and you are not different, is that when you have the chance, you will also kill the prophets I send. So doing the right thing because there hasn't been any prophets to kill is not doing the right thing, because the wrong thing's still in your heart. It's kind of like when I was in high school, I was doing the right thing. I hadn't slept with any girls, but it wasn't because it wasn't in my heart. It was because I hadn't had the chance yet. If I got the chance, I would have. And so that doesn't make me holy. That doesn't make me righteous just because I hadn't done that. Because what was inside of me, and then Jesus said that, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, if you lust after a woman, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So I wasn't holy. Just because I hadn't done this thing, and a lot of people would have rewarded that and say, good job, give you a purity ring, do whatever. You haven't done this. Well, I wasn't pure by any means. I just hadn't had the chance. And that's what he's saying about these people that are saying, well, I haven't killed the prophets. We wouldn't have done that. He's saying, yes, you would have. And not only that, you will. Number 5, what does Jesus say in verses 37 through 39? A, you are on the wrong path for what you have done and continue to do. I have B, I have always longed to gather you all together to be close to me. C, but you were not willing. So he says, this isn't my problem, my fault. I want to gather you to myself, but you don't want anything to do with me. Look at the consequences of your actions. He said, uh, he actually says, um, look, your house is left desolate. So in other words, the consequences of your actions are showing up in your household, in your family, in your descendants, and you don't even recognize it. And now this is your last chance. You won't see me again till I return. So until they say you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," which is what they said when he came into Jerusalem, and so he's referring to when he returns, the second coming. You're not going to see me again. So you have not responded before, and this is your last chance, because when I come again, it won't be coming to tell you to fix yourself. It will be coming to tell you you had the chance and you didn't fix yourself. Number 6, how would you respond if we were not? How would we respond if we were not the heroes of this story, but we were actually the ones that Jesus was talking to? In other words, we have a tendency, so we don't read about the disciples here. We think we're the disciples. We're just sitting here listening to Jesus, rah, rah, good job, Jesus, let them have it. Or we think we're Jesus, telling them. We like to tell people, yeah, see, you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't be, don't you read this scripture? Woe to you. And so we become Jesus or his disciples in the story, and we assume we're the heroes of the story. But how would we respond if Jesus was talking to us? And the second part says, are we the ones he's talking to? And the answer is, I think absolutely. We are the ones he's talking to. That the church historically has been very much the same as the Pharisees. And you might say, well, not me. Well, maybe you saying not me just proves that it is you. I don't know. That might be something to consider. So let's consider, are we those that have focused on what looks holy but not been holy? Are we the ones that have said, hey, this is what it takes to come to God, and we've shut people out, shut the door in people's faces? Are we the ones that have taught things but not practiced them, that have tithed but not really been a person of God who loved justice and mercy and faithfulness? And so we need to just reflect on this, consider this.